Hi, good morning. It's Tim Daniels here from Manitoba. Here calling in from Kishkimaquan, the Treaty One territory. I'm the Manitoba director for CanDo, and I'm pleased to be here with you today, and also the chief operating officer for the Treaty One Development Corporation. And it's going to be an exciting presentation. I've been looking forward to this one. Is Zoom. I mean, we use it quite a bit, Zoom and Teams and other platforms, but my preference is Zoom. And I try to encourage people to use that platform, and I'm looking forward to some of the advanced features that we could use with Zoom. So I'm going to hand it over to Michelle.
All right. Well, good morning. Thank you, Tim. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Links to Learning. This is Manitoba session. But we welcome everyone. So I'm glad that you have joined us this morning. It's been a year. It's been a year since we've been in this pandemic and really had to pivot, really had to shift, had to change and adjust to how we have done things. And Zoom and all these other platforms have been really, really helpful to us, for us to be able to connect. So we have Justin joining us this morning. He is going to talk about Zoom 101 coming together virtually. I think it's going to be a great workshop, great presentation, great refresher. There's still, even though it's been a year since we've been using Zoom in this way, I feel like I still have some things to learn. So welcome, Justin. We're glad and honored that you are here. For those who have joined us this morning, we welcome you. There is going to be a link that's sent to you at the end. It's an evaluation link. So we really think your voice is really important. We'd love to hear your feedback. And when you fill out that evaluation, your name will be entered to win a draw. I believe there's two $400 Visa gift cards up for grabs. So it's really in your best interest to fill that out. Because who wouldn't want to win a $400 Visa gift card? So thank you for filling that out. There will be an opportunity at the end for questions and answers, comments, dialogue, but in the event that you have some questions throughout, feel free to use that chat box. And also feel free to use that chat box. Let us know where you're joining from. So I'm joining from the overcast and Misquitchie, Weskaigan, so Edmonton Treaty 6 this morning. I'm waiting for that sun to come out because it is the first week of spring. So I'm ready for this season. So use that chat box. We'd love to hear from you. And I think that's it. So welcome. Glad you have joined us. And I'm just going to pass it over to our guest speaker this morning, Justin.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Good morning, everyone. For those of you who I haven't said good morning to already, I'm very glad you're here. Thank you so much for taking the time out of a early Thursday morning to be here with us. Just as Tim was saying and Michelle was saying, Zoom has been around for a while, and it may seem a little redundant to talk about it when we're a year into having to use this platform for essentially everything. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to screen share a presentation that's going to help me along with some of the points I'm going to be making today. So originally, this was supposed to be hosted with myself, Justin Chrones. My Haida name is Tsila Dung from the Uklanis clan of the Haida Nation. I've been working with Cardin Consulting for about 2 years now, doing everything from video production to governance policy editing to strategic planning to finance committee meetings. And all in there, we've had to work with a medium that has sometimes been finicky, sometimes a little mysterious. But originally, this was supposed to be with a fellow consultant named Mark Salter, who won't be joining us this morning. But getting straight into it, the first point I'd like to get over is a welcome to everyone and acknowledge that being on the Tsleil-Waututh territory, we get to live and work and play here, and it's a great time, but none of the work we do would be possible without the help of a whole lot of people behind us, and we really appreciate it. Now, today we're going to be covering quite a few topics, and I don't expect everyone to memorize all of these things. In fact, I'm not the first to say them by a long shot, but I may be one of the first to put them all together in a format aimed at Indigenous communities. So all of these things can be looked up separately. Take note of your favorites and maybe keep a running tab of things you want to Google later. The first part is what is remote conferencing software, followed by equipment, before a meeting, facilitation tips, after a meeting, technical difficulties, and then a closing or a Q&A. Now, our very first part of that is, why does this matter? Why come here at all? And who's to say you don't already have an expert PhD in how to use Zoom? And that comes down to Indigenous involvement and why Zoom is maybe more important for us than it might be for your average Fortune 500 company. Now, we have been using Zoom for, like I said, about a year now. And throughout all of that, we've seen a much bigger engagement from a subset of Indigenous communities which might not otherwise have been adequately represented. Within a historic pandemic, there are the health concerns of meeting in person, so community meetings are suddenly much more challenging. You have participation in very important nation government business, forming an election code, forming governance policy, ensuring that there's transparency within your nation, all require very heavy involvement with your nation. And something like Zoom or Microsoft Teams or any of these video conferencing platforms make that possible, which is really interesting to see. It also has the unique benefit of maybe not necessarily needing to be strictly moderated so long as there is good leadership and open communication behind it, but we'll get to that a little bit later. Now, what does that term mean, remote conferencing software? It means Zoom, for lack of a better descriptor, but it can also mean a few more, because there have been a few more hanging around over the last couple of years. I've had the fortune and misfortune of using almost every single one. And with that comes a heavy dose of experience with them, as well as maybe some things I can help pass on. For today, we're going to treat them all as Zoom, because they all have very similar feature sets. They all work more or less the same. They're all video interactive platforms with an audio component with some gimmicks like screen share or a green screen background like I have here today thrown in the mix just to confuse us. Now, we have a whole bunch of different buttons, and they can sometimes be confusing for sure. But breaking them down ever so slightly, we have general settings. Those are things like, where is this program located on your computer, or who is using this program? Things that are available in almost every single video conferencing or chat application, and that don't generally need to be changed on a day-to-day basis. They can more or less be left alone. We also have audio-video settings. Those cover what audio source the application is drawing audio from. In the case today, I have an external microphone, and I would want to clearly distinct that from the microphone built straight into our computer here that we're broadcasting from. We also have video settings, which distinguish what camera you're using, what resolution you're using that camera at. And this is generally the section you'd go to if all of a sudden your webcam stopped working or your microphone stopped working. There are moderation settings, which allow us to view and make sure that participants are using chat correctly and that they aren't unmuting themselves at inopportune times so that we can hear their cats running around in the background or their kids fighting over their favorite toy. We also have functionality settings. That covers things such as a green screen, like I have behind me, or a screen share, things which might be unique to one particular platform and might need some fine-tuning to get them working properly. There's also profile settings, things that can be important for Zoom specifically, because Zoom has a 1-hour limit on meetings as a free version and can sometimes need to require a paid version for things like community meetings, which will definitely run over an hour in almost every single community. Now, let's get to what most people actually came here for, is how can I improve my use of Zoom? Now, the very first part that most people overlook is the biggest part of video conferencing for most people tends to be the video aspect, meaning that as I'm sitting here talking to you today, I have lighting coming forward towards me rather than up above, because lighting up above casts shadows over your face. Think of the way how when you look at yourself in a mirror in your bedroom, typically bedroom lighting is up above. When you go into the bathroom and the lights are all in front of you, then everything looks brighter, everything looks clearer. You don't look quite as half asleep. And that's very intentional. The lighting is forward. There's also no bright lights behind you as you're looking in the bathroom. And that can be really, really important, especially for video conferencing, because a camera does work essentially the same way as the human eye does, collecting light to form an image. So if there's a bright light behind me, suddenly all of that light is going straight into the camera instead of bouncing off my face. So I seem very dark, as in the first example we give there. The second example we give is Mark Salter from Cardin Consulting being as charming as he possibly can. And he has lighting that is in front of him. He also has a very static and blurred background, meaning that it isn't distracting from the subject matter, especially when we're talking about Zoom, where most of us are working from home. That's a big point that some of us forget, is that our background can be just as important. Because if we have a messy kid's bedroom behind us, or the kitchen that hasn't maybe seen a sponge as I perhaps should, then it reflects poorly and distracts from the subject matter being presented. And that generally isn't a good thing. You want to make sure that your message is being heard without the same distractions you might see. That also includes these virtual backgrounds that we love to use, and today I'm happy enough to be using a green screen, but I've chosen a very static image. This is a longhouse. And as much as we might all love these palm trees, they look fun, but they can be distracting, and they don't typically make a lot of thematic sense. So something static, something easy, something not intrusive to the presentation. Now, the biggest point, which I'm going to beat as much as I can, is audio quality. And that comes from experience, and that also comes from a few observations which will seem very obvious as soon as I say them. Audio quality matters a lot more in a video presentation platform than video does. To demonstrate this, if I were to suddenly turn off my camera, the message I'm imparting to you is uninterrupted. You might get a little bit less out of it because my hand movements or my facial expression might be invisible to you, but you're still able to capture what's going on. If I were to mute my microphone, which I won't do, then suddenly you can't hear me. And I don't know enough sign language, and I'm sure many of the audience don't either, to actively participate in that sort of video conference. Now, to demonstrate our requirements for these, we've had radio for decades before we finally mastered the Star Trek video conferencing thing. So it's pretty important for a message to come across clearly. Now, that can mean thinking about a few things. The first is, where is that audio coming from? Typically, something like a USB plug-in microphone or a separate microphone, as I have here today, is preferable to something, say, built into a laptop or coming from a smartphone. And that's for a few reasons. But the first is, you can hear me, hopefully, pretty clearly. But what we want to avoid is if I very quickly switch over my microphone to be the one built into our broadcasting computer, all of a sudden my audio is hollow at best. It sounds like I'm coming from down a hallway, and I don't sound nearly as good. And to spare you a little bit, I'm going to turn it back to our microphones. And maybe I do see Tim's camera on. Tim, you can give me a thumbs up if you heard a difference there. And to sum up a very long technical rant, microphones work the same way as humans' ears do. The clearer they are, the more uninterrupted they can be, the better the audio quality will be. The closer you are, the better the sound. Tim, I think you have a question there.
Yeah, I have a question, and maybe if I can add to it, if I can, about audio is very important. And I'm hosting I'm doing a technical hosting of a virtual powwow club next on Monday, and audio is very key. We can't have just using your laptop and this microphone, and USB microphones are great, but can you get a cord that's 50 feet long uh, for a USB mic? So typically you want to use your straight up analog microphones, and here's a device I use. It's a USB interface. Musicians use it, and it has the connection, your microphone connection here, XLR right here. And I have another box like this that has more inputs, but so because I needed two microphone setup, so this is what I use is this audio interface for good quality and two microphones. Just wanted to share this. It's called a audio interface. That's what I use. Just
Funny you should bring that up. Thank you, Tim. I am going to get to that very shortly, but I also have that exact thing. That is the Scarlett 2, and I love it to death. But we'll cover that in just a moment.
sorry to steal your thunder, but
No, that's great. The more participation, the better. So keep them coming. I want to quickly cover what these microphones do, and that is they pick up voices and sounds, obviously, but they don't just pick up what we want them to pick up. Very often that's something we forget. Living in our homes, we get very used to the lively noise that can sometimes be present, whether that be a TV on to entertain the kids in the morning, or that be the dog running around. Background noise is picked up just as much by these guys, meaning to be considerate to the people participating in your workshop, in your community meeting, in your chaired session, whatever it happens to be. You want to sit there and think for a moment, how does my space sound? Should I maybe ask the kids to play in another room? Should I put the dog outside first? All of those things make for a less distraction presentation. Now, there's also stable internet connection, which does play a big part, meaning a hardline connection, something like an Ethernet cable, if you've seen those recently, is preferable to Wi-Fi. As much as we all love Wi-Fi, it can result in some problems sometimes. Now, going back to Tim's point, which I absolutely love because this is what I tend to do for a living, is help set up these studios and situations for those who might not have them. We have microphone, camera, and lighting in that priority list. I'll cover the left-hand one first, or left, depending on which side I am. Microphones. USB and XLR microphones can be purchased anywhere from $10 to $10,000, depending on how much you want to spend on your setup. That's not to say you need a $10,000 setup. Whatever you're comfortable with and whatever you believe that would present the best audio interface for you is perfect. You can have the simple USB, plugs into your computer, works automatically. You don't need to do anything with it. Or you can go all the way something like this with what Tim was holding up with an XLR interface. Neither one is going to be noticeably better over a Zoom call unless you know what you're doing with it. So I would always advise reading ahead. I would advise reading the use case of those who have those devices. For instance, that bottom device there that is called a Shure MV7. I'm using that here today. That is my preference. It's an XLR and USB microphone. I've been using them for a while since they came out, and I love it. However, that's not to say my message could not be communicated to you using a $5 USB microphone. It may not sound as good, but that comes with the trade-off of what am I comfortable with? What have I read about, and what do I think my use case will be? Someone has been in the same situation before. They've probably posted about it on an Amazon review, and they probably have something for you to learn from. So I always advise reading ahead. Video reviews on places like YouTube, or article reviews on blogs and technology forums are fantastic places to start. There's also cameras. They fall into a similar rabbit hole potential where if you just Google what is the best camera, you will find that people are very happy spending tens of thousands of dollars on their camera, or you could buy one off Amazon for $5. That's not to say that you need one or the other. It comes down to a comfort level. What do you think will suit your needs and your use case? Again, reading ahead is a fantastic idea. A low quality webcam is going to be much better than a $20,000 DSLR camera setup if you don't know how to use the $20,000 DSLR camera setup. So it requires reading ahead. It requires thinking about your use case, and it requires doing so carefully and not making an impulse decision, as I am so wont to do very frequently. Over in the very last column, we have lighting. The very top image there shows a what is called a ring light, which is what often is clipped to the top of a laptop or a screen and provides a pretty adequate amount of light over USB. I use them personally for when I don't have studio setup meetings and just need to connect with the office for a few minutes. Those studio lights, as you see in the bottom picture there, what's called an LED panel, are preferable for lighting a very large space, one like I'm in today, where that is the sole purpose of this room. Now, what's most important to think about is that the light is in front of you, bouncing off of your face into the camera. I've seen great utilities just having a bedside lamp tilted forward and pointed straight at you. It may be uncomfortable to have a lamp pointed straight at your face, but it means that you will be seen perfectly by your audience and by your participants. Now, without it, you may seem like you're not giving enough thought to a presentation, or you may be posing a problem to those who are visually impaired, who might not otherwise be able to see you. So being considerate of your audience is always the prime factor among these things, so that your message can be heard, so that elders in a community can hear you clearly without having to sort through the mumble that comes through using an iPhone microphone, for instance. Now, I'm happy to answer any questions that come along with any of this equipment. I have the better part of a decade of experience with setting all of this up and using it professionally. So if you've had a problem, I've probably had it too, and I've probably found something to fix it. But for right now, I'd like to continue on to what makes a meeting. And that is very specific today to Zoom, but though that's not to say that isn't a applicable process to, say, Microsoft Teams or TeamSpeak, Ventrilo, whatever else your software preferences happen to land on. Now, this is just as important as the meeting itself. If you don't create an adequate invitation with enough time and reach, then no one will show up and it wasn't worth doing in the first place. Now, the topic and the time is obviously going to be something you're going to think about. But usually people forget that an end time is equally important. And this also forms the shape of the meeting to come. So, for instance, if you don't allow participants to unmute themselves upon entry, you're discouraging open discussion. And that won't happen within your meeting without some significant fine-tuning on the day of. This also forms the way that presentations will be held, because you'll be establishing who can screen share. Now, formulating a lot of these thoughts ahead of time is going to help you avoid a lot of the common pitfalls that come with making them adequate and making them ahead of time. There's also a whole host of settings that I'm not going to get into today, because there's more than we could probably cover in our hour here together. But suffice to say, you want to set up all of the things which typically you might have to do on the day ahead of time. Which co-hosts are going to be there? Is it an open or closed session? Meaning maybe in a nation whose community meeting is open only to membership, you want to be able to enable a waiting room so that you can vet the names coming through and not just everyone from the internet is participating who might have seen your nation's Facebook post about it, for instance. So I'm going to leave a lot of the options for you to look into. I'm happy to answer questions about individual ones, but suffice to say you want to read through these things as carefully as you can and spend as much time on them as possible to avoid some of the things which you might have to fix later. Now, speaking specifically to meeting invitations that I alluded to just now, is you want to send those out ahead of time, whether they be through a social media site like LinkedIn, Facebook, which is very prevalent in our nation's communities, your own nation's website or organization's website, group emails of known participants if they've joined you in something else before and you know they might want to participate again. And preparing all of these thoughts and a written invitation ahead of time. This means that you're not quickly having to type it out late on a Friday afternoon right before you have to go, and it has a bunch of typos in it, because it shows a lack of consideration and it doesn't form a professional invitation. It doesn't lend itself to good thoughts. And clarify who will be participating. Now, over on the right-hand side, or right, depending on how you have me, you'll see a little box that says send invitations in an easy-to-understand way. That comes for a lot of reasons. One, not everyone has the same literacy level in our nations and in our communities. And you want to make things as easy as possible for everyone to participate, whether that be youth or elders or those who don't have the same access to education. So a time, start, and end is very important. End specifically because you want people to be able to schedule around your meeting. If I said this morning, well, our meeting is going to start at 10 o'clock and it'll go for as long as we need, people might plan later in their day to have a lunch meeting at 1, when it turns out I was thinking of a 6-hour-long work session together. And that interrupts the flow. So you want to be able to establish that well and ahead of time. Dates clearly set out, a summary of what's covered, an agenda to cover when things are going to happen and in what order. A meeting link, always very important, sometimes overlooked, sadly. I've even sent emails that I later think, oh, I shouldn't have sent that, which is why it's important to think ahead of time about these things. And any required materials. For instance, for an education or a lecture-based interaction, you might want your students to read certain topics ahead, and that's fine. But if you don't clarify that, that can lead to questions and comments and conversation, which otherwise could be avoided, and you could get straight to the material. Now, this next part, meeting agendas, is clarifying a few things that come with our Indigenous communities' habits. Creating a meeting agenda ahead of time will help your participants plan their attendance and stay engaged. Now, typically within First Nations communities, we value who we are. I know where I come from in my nation, and I remember very fondly Haida Gwaii and all of its charms, and that is something that is not typically introduced with my name in a very Western style. Hello, my name is Justin Chrones, thank you for having me. Instead, it's also my name, where I come from, why I'm here, and we're all very, very proud of that. So an introduction and an outro are very careful to schedule around. You should be planning for that time rather than just say, oh, we'll cover it at the beginning and then we'll get straight into it. It should be something that's scheduled, because we all value in our Indigenous communities our identities more than your average Fortune 500 company, I think. Now, the second point within that is community members having more passionate viewpoints than sometimes you will find in a average board of directors meeting. And that means that you have to very clearly at the outset say, I would like us to engage in this way. Respectful of each other, we are going to ask certain individuals to speak. We're going to allow them maybe a certain time to speak. And then we are going to move to the next person. And we are not going to interrupt until that person is done. Because especially within First Nations communities, a lot of people are very close, whether that be family, family friends, or just longtime acquaintances. Smaller communities tend to have a lot of ties. And in community meetings or training sessions, some of those things come up. You know, you stole my TV remote last week. Even though it may not have relevance, it's important to make sure that those kinds of discourses are encouraged to be one-on-one. So you can say, I very much encourage you to pursue this with this individual, but for right now, respecting everyone's time and the time they've set aside to be here, I'd like to move on to the topic at hand. So that may not need to be present in, say, a Stanford lecture, but is something that needs to be thought about here. Now, to keep everyone happy and to keep focus at an all-time high, it's generally a good idea to insert breaks throughout at regular intervals. And I have one in here for demonstration purposes a little later. But making sure that people are encouraged to walk around, to feel like they are able to participate in a way that may not feel forced. As I'm sure we all remember school days, having to sit at a desk for many hours, it's not pleasant, and it's not natural. A lot of us have a tendency to want to maybe grab a snack, grab a drink, walk around a little bit, and that's completely fine. And it should be encouraged, especially on a platform where people can simply mute their audio and video and go do some cleaning as they listen. There's nothing wrong with that. But as soon as people feel forced to sit down and participate in a way that is not natural to them, they will find their attention waning. There's also a few mental health benefits to that as well, but I'll leave that for the psychologist to really speak on. But I really encourage you to look into that. Our next point here is presentation materials, and what that means is whether it be video, audio, PowerPoint, pictures, a script, as is often used, they should be prepared ahead of time. One, so that they can be audited and reviewed by maybe a peer or a friend, or maybe yourself if you've had enough time to step away from them and review that material yourself. But it will avoid things like common typos. It'll make sure that what you have in those presentation materials is needed and not just something you thought was a good idea at the time. Being very familiar with your material allows you to focus on speaking. I realize the irony in reading out that, but it does mean that instead of just reading word for word your PowerPoint presentation or narrating over your video with the same script you used to record it, that isn't a presentation. That's simply narration. And sometimes it can feel rather insulting to have your intelligence questioned when you are seeing words on a screen and having someone read them to you like a bedtime story. So instead, a good presentation comes from expanding on the points presented, making sure you're offering viewpoints and engagement separate from what might be presented as an idea, which is what's covered in the next point there. Lastly, we have the way text and small details should be presented. It should be large text, very, very easy to read, no distracting visuals behind it, as much as they might be fun, and as easy to understand as possible, using language that isn't going to intimidate the intended audience. For instance, I might make this presentation very different if it was for my employer and the board of investors who were behind them. That's to say, we want to accommodate as many people as we can. A lot of those within our communities have not had the same access to education that I've had the privilege of having. And that doesn't mean that I have something they should strive for all day, every day. It just means I have to be considerate, and that we have to be considerate of those elders who, for instance, might not even speak English in our communities, or those people who are visually impaired or audibly impaired, and they should deserve the exact same amount of participation everyone else should. Now, this is the little health break I was talking about. I think I'll indulge in this a little bit, so I encourage you to go and do something, specifically leaving these chairs we all tend to be sitting in, because it increases blood flow. It'll make you feel better, especially this early on a Thursday. You might want to think about leaving just so you don't accidentally fall asleep. I'll mute my audio and video for 2 or 3 minutes, and I'll come back and check in, make sure everyone's feeling good. So go grab a coffee, go grab a blanket or something, and we'll see you soon. Thank you very much. All right. Good morning again, everyone. I hope you're back. I wasn't keeping perfect time, but I think it's been about 5 minutes now. So I'd like to check in, see how many people we have back, and potentially continue if we have people giving us some thumbs up. Elizabeth, Michelle, thank you very much. All right, I think I'll continue then. Welcome back, Tim. So, going on from that, we have my favorite part, and where my experience lay the most is what should you actually do during these darn things? What is the best way to put yourself forward, so to speak? Now, once a meeting starts that you are hosting, as this pertains to specifically, the best thing to do is to make people feel welcome. Put out the virtual welcome mat, as it were. This is a very similar skill set going back to in-person presentation and in-person facilitation, where you might make people feel welcome, greet them as they join, make sure that there is enough time to introduce themselves as they come in. That helps create a more welcoming atmosphere. It helps establish who you are as a presenter, as a teacher, as a member of the community, before you give a formal introduction and start on the topic of the day. This also allows time for people to test their audio and video, yourselves included, make sure that you can give the best presentation possible. I did that just today with those of us here. I made sure that my audio was good for everyone before we started. That includes giving co-hosting permissions, that includes assigning details to people you might be presenting with, and all those things that might otherwise need to disrupt a flow that should be done ahead of time. Introduce yourself with humility and respect is a point that was very intentionally put in there, because very, very often we have, certainly I've seen, a whole lot of nations welcome in either consultants, guest speakers, authorities in their field, and they come in with a very pompous attitude. Not to say that it isn't somewhat earned, but there should always be the understanding that in an education or a facilitation role comes the responsibility to share the information you have in a way that's accessible and easy to understand, without the arrogance of some guy thinking, I am the best person on earth and you deserve to hear what I have to say. Instead, it's simply, I have information and I'd like to share it. And it should be no more egocentric than that. We are here to share with our communities. We're not here to be listened to as a perfect authority all the time. This is also a good time to establish rules for the meeting, as I spoke to earlier in the agenda piece, which is maybe saying that throughout the meeting we have unmuting available to all. So if you do have a question, feel free to unmute and ask, or raise your hand is a great way to visually or virtually say that you would like to speak on a certain topic. We ask everyone to mute themselves in respect of whoever is speaking. This is particularly important in community engagement, where members may want to share but constantly feel like they're being overrode or overridden by other people who are not giving proper due to certain individuals. So muting yourselves when it isn't time to speak also avoids background noise, someone coughing or sneezing. We often forget that while we're sitting here listening, if I were to sneeze and my microphone weren't muted, that would take the camera away from someone else. That would also disrupt their speaking, and it would disrupt everyone else's listening of that person. Ensuring that proper screen sharing is happening, ensuring that everyone can see it, and whether you would like to engage people, especially in education, where that tends to be something that's valued, or in community engagement, where people feel more comfortable seeing the people they are engaging with. I've personally seen this in a lot of communities with elders engagement, because they feel more comfortable seeing the faces that they're engaged with. And that's something we have to be considerate of, making people feel as comfortable as possible. Moving on a little bit, we have moderation, and that's something very specific to Zoom and other like platforms. It's not a habit a lot of us have when presenting face-to-face, because we have a layer of anonymity behind Zoom, meaning I could type out a very mean comment at will and send it off and face almost zero repercussions, especially if I sign off right afterwards. And that can lend itself to sometimes some less than perfect behavior. And that means that having someone around to help you moderate either the chat, people's video being on or off, or mics being on and off at inopportune times, and all those kinds of things can be handled by co-facilitators, other people in the meeting, and especially if in a case like this where I am moderating, I also have the assistance of Michelle and Elizabeth, for instance, helping out so that if someone did have a question about what's the invite to the next meeting, I don't specifically have to answer that. And if, like we do now, we have someone joining the meeting, I don't specifically have to press the button. I can rest assured that someone else is going to take care of it, and I can continue on with my presentation. Within Zoom, that means co-hosting permissions specifically, or something that's very frequently used. Or you can give certain permissions on a per-user basis, though other platforms do tend to handle that a little bit better than Zoom. Moving on a little bit, we have tips for video. Oh, whoopsie. We have tips for video specifically. And that covers a few different things. So I'll go one by one so I don't miss anything. The skill set used to present to camera and present with a microphone is sometimes very, very different than the skill set used in person or in a classroom. I should always be speaking as closely as I can to the video, meaning that especially if I'm using something like a laptop whose webcam is embedded within the screen, the actual content I'd be looking at would be down here. Now, as fun as it might be to look at the top of my head, I can promise you that view won't get better as I get older. And we want to be conscious that it makes people feel talked down to in a quite literal way when you don't even deserve their eye contact. Which is why it's important to be conscious of your material and be familiar with it ahead of time. But it also means that if I had a screen above the webcam, and some laptops have it set up, I shouldn't be looking up here the entire time because, one, the up view of my nose is not particularly flattering, and two, it lends itself to a very unnatural viewing experience. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Viewing slightly off camera isn't going to hurt. It's mostly a consciousness that when you're speaking, people don't tend to want to look at your forehead. They want to look at you. You're the important subject, not you reading the material line for line. There's also a mindfulness of where you are, meaning that I know for a fact I can gesture up to about here, and that's just something I've remembered due to experience with cameras and a lot of experience with this setup I have here today. Though I know that if I gesture my hand up here or I hold something up here, you guys cannot see that. And that also applies forward and back, which a lot of us forget, and comes into play later with audio. But if I suddenly go way up close, then you can't see me, or maybe you can just see my eye, or if I go too far away, suddenly you can't see me at all because I'm a tiny picture next to a screen share. Next is committing that to memory specifically, because as much as it might be helpful to have specific markers, they can sometimes interrupt or you can bang into things. And be aware of your background. I spoke to this a little bit earlier, but it's generally not preferred to have, something in the background that does not lend itself to the image you'd like to present. Something like a messy closet, for instance, is something I might want to close the doors on. Or kids playing in the background. As cute as it is, and I love seeing it, it can be distracting to something which otherwise might need to be a serious topic. So a consciousness of neutral things, such as bookshelves, pictures, diplomas, all those things work really well. Or even just a flat white or wooden wall work perfectly, because they allow for a subject in front of them to be the focus rather than specifically the objects in the background themselves. And I spoke to the virtual backgrounds a little bit before, but generally, the Northern Lights thing, as much as it might be fun, can sometimes draw attention away from the person speaking, and it can look unnatural, to say the least, sometimes. Because I'd love to be in this view, I really would, but today I'm here with you, and I'm proud to be here, so I'm going to put something that isn't distracting. Avoiding moving a camera or webcam, especially for those of us who suffer from motion sickness, can be very important. So if you are broadcasting from a laptop, a tablet, a phone, for instance, typically typing or moving those devices can create some very, very, very nauseating sensations if people are trying to focus on you and have you very large on what might be a very tiny screen. And now that brings us to, oopsie, not our background changing, to the audio portion of that, which is sometimes overlooked. These microphones here in front of us have a few things which we might not think about. They work functionally the same as a human ear, meaning I should speak towards it, because as convenient as it might be to have the microphone up over here away from me, if I turn this way and start speaking, you can't hear me as clearly. If I am speaking much further away from the microphone, as I get further away, my voice becomes harder to hear, to the point where I'm no longer audible, and this isn't a pleasant experience for anyone, myself included. So we want to be as close as we possibly can. We want to make sure that we aren't introducing background noise, so things like fridges running can even make sound. Fans blowing towards it is the equivalent of you blowing in someone's ear as you're speaking. Not pleasant for most. And being gentle with a microphone, because it is the ear of your audience. So jostling it around, banging it by accident. If you're typing on a laptop where the microphone is located, that's the equivalent of typing on someone's head. It's not pleasant. Speaking clearly and loudly is something that people can sometimes overlook, because with a microphone right in front of us, you think, oh, I can perfectly soundly speak as quietly as I'd like, and that lends itself to a very NPR-style presentation, but it lends itself to a strange mood which otherwise might be avoided, and you want to bring out that same voice you might use in a boardroom or a meeting where you're projecting to people in front of you, because that's what's most natural. And mute yourself when you're not speaking. That applies to not only participants of a meeting, but yourself, because you don't want to be disrespectful of the people who have been brave enough to unmute themselves and share whatever it is that they'd like to say. They deserve the same respect you do. Moving on from that a little bit, we will get to this slide, which I love because it took me ages to find that picture. But secondly, also because this is something I would love to see more of. Traditionally, our community meetings, our elders meetings, come with a lot of engagement, a lot of participation. Those people who speak are thanked for their participation, and they're shown real gratitude for bringing those concerns or comments to light, which otherwise might not have gone said. So when Tim, for instance, unmutes himself and asks a question, I'm grateful because it allows me the opportunity to expand on a point. And I need to express that. It makes other people more willing to share. It makes other people more willing to share an opinion or their viewpoint or a way of looking at things which you might not have thought of. So saying thank you for sharing, good question, that's a great way of looking at it. I appreciate you coming on today. Those are all very simple things to say, but mean quite a lot in the long run. So keep that in mind. And the last point of being polite and be the bigger person applies to a lot of time when it could be something as simple as someone forgot to mute themselves and they're sneezing in the background. And you shouldn't take that as a personal offense. You shouldn't stop talking and refuse to speak until everyone is perfectly silent. Because it's an accident. Things happen. Be the bigger person. Accept that maybe sometimes someone just wants to argue and there's nothing you can do about it. Move on, be the bigger person. Ensure that everyone feels like you're welcoming their opinion as much as possible. And go with the flow. And this essentially boils down to things will happen. Your webcam will fail, your microphone will fail, the presentation will fail. At some point, something will go wrong. The longer you do this, the more that becomes true. And that's okay. You have to move on and accept that the people in your meeting, in your presentation, in your workshop are going to understand that, okay, the webcam has failed. I'll continue to participate anyway. The disruption comes from when you refuse to advance before my webcam is fixed, and I spend 15 minutes doing so. Instead, continue on and work the best you can. The show must go on. After a meeting, thanking everyone for their time, give details on upcoming events, just as the invitation showed earlier. So links, times, all those kinds of things. Creating meeting minutes, following up with any relevant files is very important because you want people to have all that information in their heads as you give them information to review, whether that be meeting minutes or documents you might have worked on together, or even just something thanking them for their time. It makes them more likely to engage in the future, and there's a bunch of studies in psychology to back that up, which I won't bore you with today. Now, this slide covers a lot, but suffice to say, computers are great when they work, and they're terrible and infuriating at the very least when they don't. Everyone has had a tech problem at some point. I've spent the last 10 years helping people fix them, and I'm glad to have done so. But the most common support sites that I use there are from a few universities as well as Zoom themselves. But if you've had an issue, Google it in as simple terms as you can, meaning if your webcam stopped working, you're more likely to get results from typing in Mac Zoom webcam not on than you are to get, please Google, may I have some help with this webcam that doesn't seem to be working at the moment, please and thank you. Because the way search engines are coded, simple terms work better. If you've had a problem, someone else has had it too, and they've probably made a blog post or a forum post talking about it with someone hopefully giving an answer, or they've made a YouTube video about it, and shared their experience. So there's a lot to be learned, and the more patient you are, the more likely you are to fix it. Something I fall into the trap of not being patient enough sometimes. And now we get to the very end, which is I'm happy to entertain any questions. I promise you I don't have all the answers, but after 10 years of doing this, I have a lot, and it's for no shortage of frustration trying to find them. And thank you so much for coming. Michelle mentioned a little while ago that there's a survey to fill out, and I'd very much encourage you to do that. One, because Visa gift cards are great when you don't have to do much for them. It's $400 that you could get for nothing. But secondly, also because it really helps everyone out. It helps us improve the presentations for you and make sure that you're engaged on your convenience and that you can participate in these more frequently. So thank you very much. I'll pass it back over to Michelle, Elizabeth, and or Tim, depending on who would like to speak. If you have any questions, now's the time to raise your hand or unmute yourself, or maybe just throw a carrier pigeon my way. I'm sure somehow I'll get it. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Justin. It was a great presentation. And I see Tyndall and Blair turning on their cameras. Maybe you have questions for Justin or some comments. Tyndall and Blair are employees of the Treaty 1 Development Corporation and the Treaty 1 Nation. So glad to see them joining. Blair's the marketing and communications for the Treaty 1 Development Corporation, and Tyndall Fontaine is the admin assistant for the Treaty 1 Nation.
Thanks for inviting me today. I did learn lots, took a bunch of notes. I'm really new to all this video stuff, so it was good information to have, and I'll add that to my notes to turn your ringer off on your phone.
Very easy to forget. All good.
Yeah. No, but thanks. I did learn quite a bit today, and it's all useful information that I'll use in the future.
No, yeah, it was good. It gave me a lot of information, especially with distracting backgrounds and people walking by. It was good.
Some of the challenges that I've had experiencing, well, I've been a Mac user, for the last going on 12 years now. So, getting cameras to work with your Mac has been a challenge. I found that Sony products don't really work with Macs. I've tried hooking up video cameras or DSLR cameras to Macs, and there's nothing from Sony support on that side. So you really got to, when you're thinking about buying a DSLR to add to your visualies, research what works with them. If you're using a Mac, research what uses. I find Nikon and Canon work very well with Macs. Just my 2 cents.
Speaking on that very quickly, I know a lot of us do use Mac. In fact, the Cardin Consulting computer that I'm using here today is a Mac, despite me having my own personal Windows machine right here because this is my preference. A lot of hardware does not tend to work with Macs, and as unfortunate as it is, that's by design on Mac's part. They want you to buy their peripherals, and they don't want anything else to work. Though, because of this, a lot of people with Macs have made open source, free-to-use software that allows things like Sony, Nikon, and Canon products to work with the Mac via a little application that they've coded and put on the internet. I can't remember for the life of me what it's called, but it is out there. But it comes with the standard caution of don't just go downloading things you aren't sure about, and don't go giving them permissions on your computer without being sure. But with the proper knowledge and enough research, you can find tools that really, really help. A common one, for instance, is multiple microphones. Macs don't like it when you plug in multiple microphones. They really don't like it. In fact, they have a tendency to completely shut down and blue screen, even though that's not a thing anymore, when you do so. There are tools built into Macs, such as the MIDI customization tool, which is called Audio MIDI Setup. I have it open right now. There's also applications called Loopback Audio, as well as a few others. And there's also programs for Windows that do very similar things. So those are very common issues that might seem unsolvable from an operating system side, and they don't provide a lot of built-in feature sets that help. But with a little bit of Googling and a little bit of experience, having been frustrated by this, you can find a solution.
That's good. I was thinking about all of the technical difficulties, all the errors that I made in the last year. And let me tell you, there were many. So I think that this presentation really, I've been doing Zoom now for sure for at least a year, but this has really been helpful for me. Good reminder, good refresher. I appreciate the presentation. Just quick question about, I bought these specifically for microphone use, and I feel like they don't do really well. So do you have any?
I do actually. In fact, Lara and Mark both have those AirPods, and I've spent hours getting them to work. I'd love to get to the question I believe someone has there, but I'll quickly answer this as fast as I can. Long story short, Bluetooth is a technology which was implemented about a decade ago in the mainstream. They sacrifice audio quality for latency, and that's something built into the technology itself, and there's no way of fixing it. Meaning anytime you're using both the audio playback and the microphone recording functions of a Bluetooth device at the same time, it's going to sound terrible, for lack of a better word that is kinder. So typically having your headphones for playback while also having a separate microphone device is best, even if it's just a $5 mic off Amazon. That'll help fix a lot of issues.
Okay, cool, thank you. And we have a question here. Yes.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Hi, Justin. This was really a good presentation. I thought, I think I've learned as much from your content and from you just showing it, just being an example and of what is a good presentation. I have a question. A lot of the materials you were covering were on, mostly on conferences, presentation. Most of my meetings are, through Zoom business meetings, just one-on-one, or sometimes with a few partners. And those are usually the one I see that goes kind of sideways. They're where we there's less structure, and sometimes it's more awkward, and we skip steps. Sometimes people will just go right into the matter of subject without presenting themselves, without everyone feeling welcome. And I was wondering if you have any tips for those, because I found those to be the most challenging, because also sometimes the authority is not well designed, so it's not well defined. So who's leading the meeting? Sometimes the person who's send the invite and supposed to lead the meeting is not really leading it, or is just leading it, but sometimes you're you skipping step, and you're okay, well, I'd like to present myself too, or so I'm wondering if you have any tips for that.
I thank you for asking, and I could definitely go all day on that subject. I went to school for communications and psychology, And that's actually something that's not only come up in the last year, but it's been exacerbated by things like Zoom and its inherent latency. But that's something we have a lot of challenges with, even in person. People talking over each other and thinking it's just okay to speak louder instead of giving someone a turn to speak. There is no quick and easy solution to that. The best thing we can do is stand up for each other, meaning that if all of a sudden Tim started speaking right over you, I would come on and I would say, Tim, I appreciate you sharing, but can we first have the person speaking finish their thought, and then we'll go to you afterward. Introducing it in a way that is neutral, positive to everyone, instead of saying, hey, stop talking right now, or I'll, I don't know, turn this Zoom meeting around, generally lets people feel more welcome and join in on the conversation. There isn't an easy way to make it perfect, but moderation can often help. If someone refused to stop talking, even after being asked to, having someone help with co-hosting permissions, maybe mute them. It can seem intrusive, but in fact, it helps everyone to be heard, and they can always just unmute themselves. And if someone still isn't getting the hint and they refuse to stop talking no matter what, I've seen this happen several times, unfortunately, having people leave the meeting by disconnecting them sometimes creates a much better environment. The discomfort of one disruptive personality can help everyone else feel more welcome. And it's weird to have a morality around who you're allowing to participate, but if someone's making others feel unwelcome, all the others will leave and they won't participate, or they won't have been functionally there. Be as kind as you possibly can. Stand up for those who were speaking and might have been spoken over, and generally try and listen. That's something we can learn a lot from a lot of our historical methods of sharing. Indigenous peoples have a tendency to let people speak over a longer time and hear their entire thought, especially when you get to elders meetings, which happen quite frequently within communities. It's much better to let a silence hang. Typically, a lot of our Western teachings and social norms come to filling those gaps so that they aren't awkward. If I simply stop talking and allow people to speak, someone will come to fill that void when they feel ready, especially over Zoom, where it might take a second for me to, where's my mouse? Let me unmute it. Let me turn on my camera. It takes a second. And when you're on the other side of the line, it takes twice as long because of the gap in that information passing back and forth over the internet. So being as patient as we can. I've been using these kinds of technologies for longer than I can remember, and there are some habits I've formed, like allowing people longer times to unmute themselves, or as soon as I think someone's done talking and I want to interject a thought, I don't, because as much as I might want to share it, they might have already started talking again on their side, and I would have been interrupting them. So there's a few habits to think about. It comes down to experience. The more you use them, the better you'll get. And feel free to be vocal when someone's talking over one another. Say, hey, I just want to hear the rest of Michelle's thought. Thank you so much for participating, Elizabeth, but I really need to hear Michelle's thought right now. It really does help.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate you coming.
Another thing to getting used to different platforms, like the government, the government likes to use Microsoft Teams.
Oh.
And when we meet with them, they insist they have to come in through Microsoft Teams. And then there's another department, Parks Canada, whom I work with too, and they insist on Google Meet. So, but then seems to be our preferred platform in our office is GoToMeeting. But I have challenges with that one too, where I see there's a lot of lag using GoToMeeting, and that's where you have your problems of talking over each other. And I seem to have no problems with Zoom, but I don't like Teams, and also our own platform that we use at our office is GoToMeeting, but I see a lot of lag.
I could very much appreciate that. I've had to use Teams before with those I've worked with before, whether they be clients or not. I don't think anyone likes Teams inherently, and it has its own problems. All of these software solutions all face very common issues of latency, ease of access and ease of use, and generally security and stability. They might crash, they might fail, they might be hard to use, and they might not even do their job properly. And there's no real perfect solution. If there was, we'd all be using it. My personal preference is for one that no one has heard of and no one uses because it's not a formal meeting engagement tool, but it works better. So there's always a solution. Not everyone uses it well, especially when we're talking government, which is an important point when thinking about self-governments and self-determination. The Canadian government actually has a deal with Microsoft to use things like Word, PowerPoint, Outlook, Microsoft Teams, OneDrive, which is their online cloud storage solution. So their tendency towards those things is quite high. In addition to the fact that the things with the most market share, i.e. Zoom at the moment, tend to be the most popular. I personally dislike Zoom for a host of reasons, their company's practices as well as their interface isn't particularly friendly, and sometimes it just breaks entirely and it doesn't have great options for that. But I've used it for so long that I've gotten to know its quirks, and I know how to fix those things that bother me. And that's why I find it so important to connect ahead of time, download these things, test it out, play with a friend, get a coworker, and set up a meeting between 2 or 3 just so you can all test out your audio, your video, test out all these features you don't understand, spend half an hour doing it. It really does help, and half the time it's actually quite fun because you can laugh together at all the silly filters that they love putting on here. What was it, a couple months ago where a government official had these little cat ears on him during a meeting, and he had to clarify, I am in fact not a cat. So these things, as silly as they look, are quite fun to play with, but maybe not in a professional environment. I wish I had a better answer.
I was just thinking of that story as well. The lawyer and the judge. Judge, I'm not a cat. That was a great story. Thank you so much for all of your advice and your knowledge. Just want to open it up. I know Brad's here. I don't know if there's no pressure, but just want to say if you have a question, comment, feel free to come on. Feel free to use that chat box as well. But Justin, we're so grateful. We're so honored that you were here to lend your time, your knowledge, your expertise. Thank you so much. I appreciate your presentation, your workshop, so helpful. So it doesn't look like there's any more comments or questions. I really appreciate all of you showing up. It was a good discussion this morning. Remember to fill out those evaluations. So Elizabeth will be sending that to you. And you have a good chance in winning one of those 2 gift cards. We'd just really love to hear your feedback, really important. So next week we're on a little break, but we're coming back. The Links to Learning is going to continue from April to June, but we're more on a condensed schedule. So if you're interested just to participate and learn more, I know I have been enriched. I've really appreciated the wisdom and the knowledge that each presenter and speaker has brought to this forum. Please join us. So they will be on Tuesdays at 3 p.m. So that's Mountain Standard Time. And then Thursdays at 10 a.m. Again, that's Mountain Standard Time. So that time might be different from where you are joining from. So feel free, we'd love for you to join us in the coming up months. We're grateful, honored. We give thanks that you are here. Again, I can't say enough, Justin, you have brought a lot of good knowledge today. So be well, everyone. We hope that you walk in a good way, take time, go outside, just appreciate this new season of spring that we're in. Give thanks to Creator, to Mother Earth, the land, the waters, the animals, the plants, all of our relations. Also, just, connect with some of people in your circle, reach out, ask people how they're doing. It's important really to look after one another. So be well, take care of yourself, drink water, and be kind to all of those around you. Peace.
Thank you. Miigwech.
Thank you so much. It's been an honor. Have a good day, everyone.
Have a good day, everyone.